Yeah, let's discuss Emily's Tinder date.
I'm kidding.
Haven't talked shit about anyone.
There's been no Tindering.
We're nice. We're the nice ones.
We are the nice ones.
Oh, God. I hate this. Now it's like, I don't know what to say to you.
Becky's feet smell so bad.
My shoes are back on.
I'm kidding.
Oh, God. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, should we shut the door or not?
I'm going to be...
Should we practice?
I feel like we've practiced.
We have practiced.
Yeah.
You guys are great.
Oh no.
What?
Look at Slack. Do it. Look at Slack.
Wait. ETA.
Shh.
I don't know. Oh, it's fine. The thing is, like,
I feel you.
I'm just focused on
I'm
doing
like
this. You know what I mean?
I know.
Like, this is...
Yay!
But we do have to have... When was it the first broadcast that Kristen and Mike had to, like, improvise for a couple minutes?
Mike says, be careful what you say.
Everyone is telling us to be careful. I'm like, have we said something horrible?
Should I shut the door?
I'm going to be viewing.
Oh.
So, wait, what is all this?
Oh, God.
Oh, I give it.
Oh.
No, you
The host Pia is in the version you have, so use that. Oh, shit. I'm just getting scared now. Oh, fuck.
My parents are in Puerto Rico right now.
Get out.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's February 17th. I'm Rebecca Scott.
And I'm Emily Dugdale. Some Muslim women in New York City are trying to change the way people see the hijab.
The American imagination has a completely warped understanding of what it means to be a Muslim woman.
Since the presidential election, many more people are making calls to their representatives for the first time, and that can be tough for people who take them.
One of the important lessons to learn in this job is how to end a conversation. Sometimes that's really hard.
One of the largest apartment buildings in the country hasn't had gas since November.
It's a headache because you can't cook a decent meal and it's not fair.
Scientists make progress to understand why Alzheimer's patients wander, making sense of Trump's latest attack on the media, and in a polarized political scene, publishers are struggling too. All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
Sang.
We hate
Despite demonstrations for his release, Daniel Ramirez Medina will remain behind bars in Seattle under the orders today of a federal magistrate. But the judge also ruled that Ramirez must be allowed to get a bail hearing in an immigration court within the week. Immigration agents accuse the 23-year-old of having gang ties, but Ramirez's attorneys deny their client even had a criminal record. They say he should not have been detained because he was legally protected under a federal program that allowed young people brought to this country illegally as children to attend school and to work. Ramirez's case is sending chills through immigrant communities across the U.S. Some 750,000 so-called dreamers stand to be affected. The Trump White House had pledged to address the issue with heart. After hours of debate, Miami-Dade County's Board of Commissioners voted today to ratify a policy on detaining immigrants ordered by the county mayor. NPR's Greg Allen reports Miami-Dade has changed a long-standing policy and has now begun holding inmates on behalf of federal immigration authorities.
The policy change was ordered by Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Jimenez a day after President Trump signed an executive order threatening to cut off federal funds to so-called sanctuary cities. Jimenez told county corrections officials to begin holding inmates with federal immigration detention orders. Miami-Dade's county commission heard from dozens of residents, including a group of children who said they worried their parents could be deported under the policy. Mayor Jimenez said the policy only affects people arrested for other crimes. Miami-Dade police, he said, won't act as immigration officers. Miami-Dade commissioners said their vote to restore the policy ensured the county would not lose access to federal funds. Greg Allen, NPR News, Miami.
Well, shifting away from a series of high-profile distractions involving immigration, Russia, and concerns about the integrity of his national security team, President Trump is on a campaign-style tour talking jobs. Today, he was in North Charleston, South Carolina, where he touted Boeing's rollout of the first 787-10 Dreamliner aircraft. Scott Pruitt's confirmed to lead the Environmental Protection Agency, an organization he has battled in court as Oklahoma's Attorney General. The vote was 52-46. Democrats had tried and failed to delay a final vote. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell expressed overall frustration at the pace of the confirmation hearings for President Trump's nominees.
I hope at some point here the other side will accept the results of last year's election, allow the administration to get fully staffed and ready to go.
Supporters say Pruitt will spearhead reform at the EPA and streamline the agency, but critics say he will undo EPA regulations designed to protect the environment. Before the close, the Dow is up 4 points. This is NPR News.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Hannah Long-Higgins. Earlier today, Mayor de Blasio responded to the leaked executive order that revealed President Trump's plans to mobilize National Guard troops and round up undocumented immigrants, saying Trump would be met with resistance from New York City law enforcement.
That trust that we were able to build by proving year after year that we would respect people's privacy and respect their humanity allowed us to become the biggest safe city in America. Right. If that is eroded, that will have a hugely corrosive impact on the social fabric of this country.
After filing a lawsuit against Time Warner last month, the state attorney general is now urging New Yorkers to test their internet connection and share the results with his office. The attorney general claims that Time Warner delivered poor service to New Yorkers over a 5-year time span. After 1 month of regular protests outside New Jersey Republican Representative Leonard Lance's office, the congressman has announced that he will add a second town hall meeting to his schedule next week to accommodate the overwhelming demand of his constituents. His announcement comes as other Republican lawmakers are opting out of in-person town hall meetings, out of fear that angry protesters will disrupt the meeting. 2 brothers died early Friday when their Mercedes sped off the road at East 233rd Street in Wakefield and wrapped itself around a tree. New York City public schools will be closed through February 24th for midwinter break. It's 41 degrees with clear skies. Warmer temps are expected tomorrow and into Sunday. The 1 train is running without delays. Hannah Long-Higgins, Columbia Radio News.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Rebecca Scott.
And I'm Emily Dugdale.
Among the groups demonstrating against President Trump, Muslim women. They're organizing protests, speaking at rallies, and doing work behind the scenes.
As Meg Dalton reports, it's also become a way to break down stereotypes, particularly about something that's very public, wearing the hijab.
Blair Amani is standing in front of a mirror in the living room of her Bushwick apartment. She grabs a black headscarf off her couch. It has gold trim along the edges, and she starts wrapping it around her head.
I'm taking the scarf kind of lengthwise. I am taking it from the back of my head, the folded side down, and cross it over in the front, like, you're about to towel dry your hair.
She tucks in her hair, ties it, and winds the fabric down.
Like a little rope. And then I'm just kind of winding it around in a circle. And I have to pin it because it's not long enough to tuck in the back.
Amani is a 23-year-old black Muslim activist, and yes, she observes hijab. In Islam, the hijab is a head covering worn by some women. It's become a widely misunderstood part of the religion in the U.S., and many Americans might be surprised someone as young and progressive as Amani is embracing the garment. But for her, the hijab represents the complete opposite of those stereotypes.
Anytime you're, forcing ideas or a way of dressing on women, it's negative. And so for me, liberation from that was wearing hijab, but for other women, it might not be that, and that's really not for me to decide.
The American imagination has a completely warped understanding of what it means to be a Muslim woman.
That's Iman Bukadoon, a social activist and human rights lawyer.
There's this perception that the Muslim woman is docile, she's oppressed, she's uneducated, and she's certainly not empowered.
Though she doesn't cover her head, Bukadoon says it's powerful to see Muslim women being so public with their faith. Like Linda Sarsour, she's the Pakistani-American civil rights activist who was one of the organizers behind the Women's March on Washington. Bukadoon says public figures like Sarsour are reshaping the narrative of Muslim women in this country. It's a surprising and unintended consequence of Trump's recent executive order.
We're seeing different types of Muslim women, different women who prescribe to Islam, who have all kinds of different types of understandings of Islam, who are coming from different ethnic backgrounds, who come from different levels of education, who come from different classes.
Muslim women have always held leadership positions. It's not a new phenomenon. That's according to Sahar Aziz. She's a law professor at Texas A&M who has written extensively about stereotypes Muslim women face post 9/11. She says Muslim women today are just more visible, as public speakers, as civil rights advocates, and in the media.
And I think that is changing the image of the hijab, particularly in the American public's mind, but even among Muslim women who may have thought, well, if I wear this hijab, I may be presumed not to be smart, or I may be treated in a way that I find offensive.
Back in her Bushwick apartment, activist Blair Amani is getting ready to start the day. With her hijab on, she will meet some friends at a local brunch spot. Sometimes she worries about harassment on the street or being gawked at on the subway, but she doesn't let it faze her, at least most of the time.
Their stares can't really do anything to me, other than make me think that there's something in my teeth. And at the end of the day, they have to live with themselves of being, hateful, spiteful people. While, I can hope that they overcome that, it really has nothing to do with me.
Today she wore her hijab, but on another day she might not choose to wear it. She decides to cover on a case-by-case basis. And like many Muslim women, observing hijab is a personal decision. Whatever she decides, it's her choice. Meg Dalton, Columbia Radio News.
Another thing that's been happening more and more since Election Day, people are calling their elected representatives for the first time. That flood of calls is new territory for both constituents and the people on the other end of the phone. Camila Kadowska reports.
Greg Taubman was so upset by the presidential results, he's dedicating 4 hours every week to train people like Chia Morita in a Midtown artist studio. They're looking online to find who her representative is.
Good. So the only person who overlaps both is David Schweikert, so that would make me think that David Schweikert's your rep.
Okay.
Great.
Chia is from Arizona. She's lived in New York for a couple of years, but still votes in Arizona. So, Republican David Schweikert is her congressman. Taubman quickly goes over his script with Morita.
What's the benefit of putting the Trump fact in?
It puts it in a different context, or it's spicy, it's fun to say, like whatever gets you charged about it. Okay.
I guess,
yeah.
Once the script is done, it's time to call.
Congressman David Schweikert's office, this is Sam.
Hi, Sam. My name's Chie. I'm a constituent of Mr. Schweikert's from Cave Creek, zip code 85331, and I was just calling to voice an opinion, if that was all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I am calling because it's important to me that Mr. Schweikert act to prevent cutting NEA funds from the federal budget, as I hope.
Brad Usher has been on the receiving end of calls like this a lot. He's the chief of staff for New York State Senator Liz Krueger. He says it's stressful to answer calls all day on complaints that are in their control or not.
Again, the best we can do is try to provide them with accurate information about whatever is going on, and or make sure that the constituents feel that they are being heard and they're getting a chance to express their opinions.
He says beyond letting the constituent know they've been heard, there's an even trickier art: how to politely end the call.
One of the important lessons to learn in this job is how to end a conversation. Sometimes that's really hard.
As someone who's on the other end of the phone, it's so annoying.
Bella Pori has been working on a website to help constituents make calls. A key to success: keep the phone calls brief.
When someone's like, Jeff Sessions in 1982, it's like, no, get to the point. Are you pro or anti-Sessions? Come on, let's do it. So our scripts are like, hi, my name is Bella. I live in Brooklyn. I'm calling to ask the senator to vote no on Jeff Sessions. Right. And then there's a sentence of, Jeff Sessions would have policies that would be harmful to women and minorities. But like, you should be getting out your concern, your name, and where you live in the first 15 seconds.
In the same vein, her group is focusing on 3 issues: healthcare, the federal budget, and blocking cabinet appointments. More than 1,000 people from almost all 50 states have subscribed to Pori's weekly email. Back in Midtown, Chia Morita is finishing her first call with Sam, Congressman Schweikert's staff member.
Perfect. Well, I will definitely pass this message along. Thank you so much for calling.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too. Thanks, Sam.
Taubman is right there to give her some feedback.
I think you respected their time, and it sounded like they were happy to hear from you. Picked up on the first ring, which says that Schweikert's line is not that busy right now, so if you wanted to call back about other things.
Morita is visibly relieved to be done with her first call.
It's still really nerve-wracking. Yeah. I mean, I know that it's their job to be there, but as someone who's also who has had to receive calls from people voicing opinions about things, it's often difficult to get those calls.
In fact, it was so hard. She's done for the day. She says she thinks she will try calling another day. Kamila Kadalska, Columbia Radio News.
The Trump administration has declared the press the opposition. Yesterday, in a wide-ranging 77-minute press conference, the president repeatedly stressed what a poor job he feels the press is doing covering his new administration.
The press, honestly, is out of control. The level of dishonesty is out of control.
After the press conference, Trump's administration sent an email asking supporters to take a survey titled the Media Accountability Survey. It includes questions like, do you trust CNN to report fairly on Trump's presidency? And do you believe that our party should spend more time and resources holding the mainstream media accountable? Some might remember Trump sent a similar poll in August as a presidential candidate, but it's the first of its kind from an acting president. Fred Blevins teaches media and law at Florida International University. I asked him what it meant to have a sitting president so confrontational towards the mainstream media.
Well, we've never seen anything like this before. Presidents have their dust-ups with the press, but most of the presidents have been able to avoid incessant warfare that he seems to engage in.
And so how should journalists react to this kind of survey? Should there be concern?
Well, the survey is not surprising. In his world, that is the way you do things. You criticize every survey that comes out, and then you do your own survey and you endorse that. You know, I think the best thing to do would be to just not pay attention to it. They should respond with their professionalism. And is the study legitimate? Of course it's not. You're going in with a preconceived notion of what you're going to find out.
We noticed that the survey doesn't touch on print or radio media, so it only focuses on television, despite the fact that President Trump has come down pretty hard on mainstream papers like the New York Times. What do you think the reason is we're focusing on, some of these outlets like CNN and Fox?
He's a TV guy. He's not a reader, and he admits that. His natural proclivity is to strike out at broadcast media. And I think it, based on his behavior when he has gone to visit it, print outlets that he has very little idea of how a print newspaper actually operates. And based on what he said yesterday in the press conference, I question whether he knows anything about journalism at all.
And sometimes I'll say, wow, that's going to be a great story, and I'll get killed. I know what's good and bad. I'd be a pretty good reporter, not as good as you. But I know what's good. I know what's bad.
I mean, the idea that it is up to the president to select what is a good question and a bad question, I mean, the press's response to that ought to be, well, we'll make that determination.
Right. That's interesting that you say that because, this survey does focus largely on the issue of biased news coverage. And this is an issue that we at Uptown Radio have been thinking about a lot in terms of how objective we and other reporters can be with our journalism during the Trump administration. Do you think that the mainstream media is biased?
Yes, I think they're biased toward their audiences. And that's a perfectly acceptable bias. That's where you want them to be. Because the idea is to deliver the best product and the most truthful product that you can deliver to your readers. That's a bias toward a reader.
So how does Trump coming head-to-head with the media change the job of journalists covering him?
I would say that it would be a question of frustration more than altering my behavior. The thing yesterday about, the Electoral College was just insane.
Because people came out and voted like they've never seen before. So that's the way it goes. I guess it was the biggest Electoral College win since Ronald Reagan.
A bald-faced lie. Both of Obama's electoral margins were higher than his. And he said those numbers were given to him. Now, you'd think that the president would demand that facts be correct when they are handed to him. But there is no concern about that. It's just say it and then turn around and blame it on somebody else who gave him the information. There's a certain amount of corroboration that you would expect of a president, the same way as you would of a CEO or someone running a big corporation, is that, there's some credibility here. And he has no credibility. I mean, he can't be believed on any front. If his credibility factor is measured by fact-checking, puts him at single digits, it makes it very difficult for him to accuse the media of having little credibility.
We spoke with Florida International University journalism professor Dr. Frederick Blevins to understand what the long and short-term implications are with President Trump's war on the media. Thank you so much, Dr. Blevins, for being with us today.
Thank you.
The country is deeply divided over politics. You can even see it on the bestsellers list. Dystopian classics like George Orwell's 1984 and Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale are neck and neck with J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy about growing up in West Virginia. That's all good for the book business. But when Simon & Schuster announced it would pay $250,000 advance for Dangerous, the upcoming autobiography of Milo Yiannopoulos, there were immediate backlash. My co-host Rebecca Stott has the story.
The publishing industry is in the business of selling ideas from the left and the right. You can see this at the Barnes & Noble on 114th and Broadway as soon as you walk in. There's a table of bestsellers at the front of the store. From behind the information desk, Tony Coleman says that's where Yiannopoulos' memoir, Dangerous, might end up.
If it were to be a bestseller or something like that, we would totally have it.
But selling books from both sides of the political spectrum can cause problems.
We have gotten backlash from customers over our decision to feature LGBTQ characters in our books.
That's Laura Bryn Sisson, an assistant editor at Scholastic.
I've read comments from customers who say they will never buy a Scholastic book from us again because of these decisions. And we stand by our publication of books that represent these diverse characters.
Simon & Schuster has a conservative imprint, Threshold Editions. It's published authors like Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, and Donald Trump. But none of these releases elicited the same kind of reaction that Dangerous has. That's according to Jane Friedman, former CEO of HarperCollins. She says this is a unique moment in our country's history.
Prior to Trump's winning the election, things felt more like business as usual. And now that a shock has been delivered, people are justifiably concerned, upset, and feel like they need to be much more active.
In reaction to Simon & Schuster's announcement of the deal, feminist author Roxane Gay cut ties with the imprint, and the Chicago Review of Books declared it wouldn't review any Simon & Schuster books for as long as it worked with the author. Friedman says it's unlikely that boycotts will affect sales of Dangerous, but concern over its brand might lead Simon & Schuster to reconsider publishing such an inflammatory author in the future.
It's really the bad publicity and the worried stockholders that's what brings the company to heel.
Back at Barnes & Noble, Tony Coleman says that when 50 Shades of Grey was released, it was displayed front and center. He says the book-selling business isn't about making moral decisions for your consumers, and points to the shelf across from him.
Roxane Gay is right there. So it's not like we're favoring someone, it's more like what people want, I guess.
And it seems like a lot of readers do want Dangerous. The book shot to #1 on Amazon during pre-sales last week. This week, Yiannopoulos announced the book release, originally scheduled for March, has been pushed back so he can include material about the recent campus protest against him. Rebecca Scott, Columbia Radio News.
New York Fashion Week might officially be over, but this morning a new fashion exhibit opened at the National Museum of the American Indian. It features the work of nearly 70 mostly young Native American designers. Pia Peterson has more.
At the entrance to the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, school groups are filing through the doors, tourists are huddled together pointing fingers at brochures and museum maps. Inside the main hall, a well-dressed woman in a long black coat walks through the doorway into a brand new show at the museum. It's opening day for the Native Fashion Now exhibit, and Shun Kelly is curious. She's one of the first patrons. The room is quiet, so she whispers her first impressions.
Really, it's an accident. I turned up here, and it's blowing my mind.
Kelly is a textiles designer who works on furnishings for high-end brands like Chanel. Like many here today, she doesn't really know what to expect. Inside the exhibit, music plays from a video by a young Apache filmmaker, Dustin Craig. There are silk parasols hanging from the tall ceiling, a beautiful hand-painted silk dress, high-heeled boots with intricate beadwork. Jared Yazzie designs his own line of clothing, OXDX. He stands next to two of his shirts in the exhibit. He introduces himself in Navajo.
So, yat Jared Yazzie nishe, hinishli, Torchini Bashishin, Kia Ane, Dashiche, 1200 I spoke Navajo, Dene. So, whenever you speak to someone in Navajo, you gotta say who you are, and then you say your 4 clans because that describes who you are.
Yazzie grew up on Navajo Nation, a semi-autonomous Native American territory in northern Arizona and New Mexico. He's wearing one of his own designs. It's a black t-shirt with a distorted portrait of the Cleveland Indians logo in the style of the punk band The Misfits, with the words misrep for misrepresentation underneath the ghoulish face. He says he doesn't appreciate when Native American images are reproduced by non-natives, on clothing or as sports mascots.
All of which doesn't represent me or represent anybody, really. It's fake, and to me it's hurtful.
Brands like Victoria's Secret, Prunza Schuler, and Urban Outfitters have all come under fire in recent years for misusing Native designs. In the same time period, there has been only a small handful of Native American designers representing themselves on major runways like New York Fashion Week. Now, Yazzie has made it to New York, but when will designers like him make it out of the museum and onto the Fashion Week runway? Museum spokesperson Joshua Voda says opening the exhibit during Fashion Week was intentional, and not just because it lures fashion insiders from all over the world to the city.
It also puts this work that is so amazing in the exhibition amongst that environment where it really belongs. The designers in this are phenomenal, and they really should be recognized at a time like New York Fashion Week.
If you ask Jared Yazzie if he could see his designs on the runway one day, he says yeah, because he dreams big. Pia Peterson, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Rebecca Scott.
And I'm Emily Dugdale. Coming up, Con Ed agrees to pay over $150 million for an East Harlem gas explosion 3 years ago. The predominantly white town of Westport, Connecticut tries to tackle race, and new research on why people with Alzheimer's wander. But first, the news.
I'm Mike Elson-Rooney. The Environmental Protection Agency has a new chief. Scott Pruitt was approved by the Senate today by a vote of 52 to 46. Pruitt, the Attorney General of Oklahoma, is a longtime opponent of the EPA and has sued the agency on numerous occasions. Senate Democrats tried to stall the vote until Pruitt released records of his communications with oil, coal, and gas companies. A judge ordered the release of the records yesterday. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer criticized Senate Republicans for pushing the vote through. He said they're using the very same tactics that they criticized Democrats for using when they were in the majority.
But what is the Republican leadership response? Strap blinders on their members and rush Pruitt through. The absolute height of hypocrisy.
Senate Republicans responded that too many of the president's appointees are still awaiting confirmation, and that the agency needed a head. Donald Trump tried to refocus his message on the economy today during his visit to a Boeing manufacturing plant in South Carolina. He promised protection for manufacturing jobs in the U.S.
This plane, as you know, was built right here in the great state of South Carolina. Our goal as a nation must be to rely less on imports and more on products made here in the USA.
Trump sang the company's praises today, but 2 months ago, as president-elect, he tweeted criticism of the price of a Boeing plane, causing the company's stock prices to drop. After a week of controversial leaks, the Associated Press released a draft of an executive order today that called for the mobilization of up to 100,000 National Guard troops to help round up undocumented immigrants. The order was dated January 25th and would have given governors from Louisiana to Oregon the option of sending troops on border missions. Press Secretary Sean Spicer said the White House does not plan to call on the National Guard. A bombing in Pakistan yesterday killed 88 people and wounded hundreds more. It was the most recent in a string of attacks against practitioners of the Sufism branch of Islam, and the Islamic State has claimed responsibility. Army retaliation was swift. The government said it has killed as many as 100 militants in response. At a conference on international security in Munich today, Arizona Senator John McCain spoke out against the rising anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe and the U.S. He said the conference's founders would be concerned by the trend.
They would be alarmed by an increasing turn away from universal values and toward old ties of blood and race and sectarianism. They would be alarmed by the hardening resentment we see towards immigrants and refugees and minority groups, especially Muslims. They would be alarmed by the growing inability and even unwillingness to separate truth from lies.
Weekend weather will be warm, with temperatures in the 50s on Saturday and reaching 60 on Sunday. Mike Elson-Rooney, Columbia Radio News.
For people who care about race and identity, there's a growing conversation about what it means for white people to think about their race and privilege. Westport, Connecticut is 97% white and one of the wealthiest towns in the country. And the town is a relatively unknown diversity council and a group of volunteers who try to promote racial and multicultural awareness.
The council stepped into the crossfire when it announced a high school essay contest earlier this month. The topic? White privilege. My co-host Emily Dugdale reports.
The next station is Westport.
Westport is just an hour by train from New York City, but the large picturesque houses tucked away in the trees are just one of the clear signs you've left urban living behind. One of the only people of color at the station is a man named Rashid. He's a cab driver. Unsurprisingly, he says that Westport isn't an easy place to be non-white, especially for young residents.
Well, the non-white kids that go here, you know, because I've been here about 4 or 5 years, and I've seen some of the kids kind of grow up. Like, I don't know, they seem like kind of quiet or like, I can't explain it.
Rashid says that some people of color in Westport just don't feel like they fit in. It's a fact that this year's annual high school essay contest topic, white privilege, tries to address. The group behind the essay is Westport's 10-year-old diversity council, Team Westport. The Council of 15 Volunteers prides itself on engaging the community in conversation about the world outside the town. But after nearly every town department and social media feed received hate mail aimed at Team Westport's essay announcement, even the council is second-guessing themselves. Just off Main Street at the Westport Town Hall, Team Westport gathered for a morning of meetings with local department heads. They're currently wrestling with the decision to allow students to submit essays anonymously, a concession that they agree undermines the central goal of the council.
To say we want to have a free discussion of ideas and we can embrace that, and then to have to say, but we have to do it anonymously, obviously we'd prefer not to do that, because it almost says we're hiding.
Team Westport doesn't conform to the typical definition of a diversity council. Unlike corporate councils, they're not looking at hiring practices or workplace discrimination. Instead, they're quietly forming African American literature classes at the local high school or co-sponsoring plays like A Raisin in the Sun. But Harold Bailey Jr., the organization's chair, says if you ask the average person in Westport what the Diversity Council did, they probably have no idea.
When you go to the talk back at the Playhouse, you don't know Team Westport did that. Or when you go to this event that we're co-sponsoring at the library, sometimes it's like Team Westport isn't even mentioned, even though we're trying to help get people there.
But that's how Team Westport likes it. They don't take to the streets with megaphones. The group is one of only 2 government diversity initiatives in Fairfield County, and they shy away from making political or controversial statements. Their efforts have a simpler focus: help make people of all backgrounds comfortable in the town. It's an issue that hits home for Westport's Staples High School, where the demographics reflect the town, over 90% white. English Department Coordinator Julie Heller is encouraging her students to engage with, not dismiss, Team Westport's white privilege essay topic.
We all recognize that, this is a bit of a bubble, if you will, and that it's very important for us to push our students beyond that bubble if we're really educating them to take their place as members in a diverse, global community.
But even Heller admits that she hasn't attended any Team Westport events outside of the high school. And she's not the only one. Westport resident Jerry Graham has lived in town for 10 years with her daughter, a sophomore at Staples High. She was disappointed she'd never heard of Team Westport before news of the essay broke. As a black woman in Westport with a biracial child, Graham has a special phrase for people like her in the town.
We're the chocolate chip in the scone of Westport.
Graham struggles to understand what the purpose of a diversity council is if most people in the town haven't even heard of them. She thinks the essay contest is exactly what the town needs, something to spice things up.
In a town like this, how do you actually get out that you have a message and need to do something like this? And I think that maybe this essay contest was probably the first thing. They maybe need to be a little bit more provocative in order to get people talking.
They didn't set out to create a stir, but in the end, Graham and others say the controversy is exactly what this town needs. Emily Dugdale, Columbia Radio News.
For reality TV show fans, their world got a little more diverse this week when the producers of ABC's hit show, The Bachelor, announced the first ever Black Bachelorette. After more than 20 seasons on air, Rachel Lindsay's turn at handing out roses marks the first time a black person has been the lead romantic interest. I spoke with Aisha Callahan, senior editor at The Root, a black news and culture site. She says, in some ways, putting a black woman at the center of the franchise is the first step to making The Bachelor more diverse, too.
For years, there has been rumors that there would be like a black bachelor, but that hasn't happened yet. So I guess they're trying to ease their way into things with a black woman.
So what do you mean by easing in with a black woman versus black man?
I think it'll probably be easier for society to look at this black woman trying to find a date instead of seeing a black man trying to date all these white women. Honestly, the contestants on that show have typically been white as far as not only just the Bachelor, the Bachelorette, but the people vying for that person's attention. So I think there are some slight racial implications when it comes to displaying, even in this day, interracial dating on television. You may see it in commercials or a TV show here and there, but it's not in your face.
Do you expect next season will feature any meaningful discussions of race?
I think now it will be. I really think now it will be because not everyone has dated outside of their race. I've dated outside of my race since high school, but not everyone has. So there's still this large population of people who have never dated someone outside of their race. And so we can't pretend like everyone is so post-racial when it comes to their dating preferences, because a lot of people aren't. So I think that will be a focus on her during her season.
Do you think that having cast a Black Bachelorette will result in a change in the demographic makeup of the viewers?
I think so. And that's another thing. TV executives know how to draw attention to their shows. And I think by casting a Black person, of course they're going to get boosting ratings when it comes to either people hate watching the show or people just wanting to see Black people on social media talking about it, discussing it, making jokes about it. They're going to get it from both directions.
So do you think this really could set the stage for a change in the diversity of both the contestants and the bachelors and bachelorettes?
I'm thinking it could, and I'm pretty sure eventually they'll have a Black bachelor. I mean, there hasn't been an Asian bachelor, and so I think it will change how they, go forward with the show. And so this is something that should have been done a while ago, but I guess it's better, now than never.
A lot of people have a lot of opinions about The Bachelorette and the contestants that they like to share on the internet. Do you think Rachel will be treated differently by the viewers?
I'm pretty sure she'll get trolled on the internet by the same types of people who sit around and post like racist things on social media. And even now as a contestant, I'm sure she was getting trolled as well. You have to have thick skin if you're going to put yourself out there to be scrutinized and having a magnifying glass on your dating life.
This is Aisha Callahan, a senior editor for The Root. And thank you so much, Aisha, for being with us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Alzheimer's disease affects nearly 1 in 9 Americans over the age of 65. The disease profoundly affects memory, including a person's ability to know where they are. Recently, researchers at Columbia Medical Center say they've figured out why Alzheimer's patients wander. Catherine Sullivan has more.
At the Riverstone Memory Center on 163rd Street, patients with dementia sit in rooms off a circular hallway. But program assistant Martine Morales says you always have to be watching.
I call it 24 eyes you have to have here.
Even those in the earliest stages of the disease need an escort.
Because some I'm going to the bathroom and then the exit sign is saying go that way. You got to redirect them.
Just down the street, a team of researchers is looking at the specific neurons that cause patients to wander. We've known for a long time now that in Alzheimer's, a protein called tau builds up and creates a kind of tangle. But the new research shows that these tangles happen in a region of the brain called the entorhinal cortex.
If you look at someone face on and look below their ears, the brain part that's behind your ears is where the entorhinal cortex is located.
That's Dr. Karen Duff, a lead author of the new study. This part of the brain helps orient us in space. It's crowded with grid cells that fire rapidly as we move, helping us recognize our surroundings.
They're like the map for your GPS system. So if your map is distorted, your GPS system can't tell you where to go.
Grid cells were only discovered 2 years ago, and Duff and her team are the first ever to study how they interact with the disease. To do it, they genetically modified mice brains to mimic the conditions of Alzheimer's patients and dropped them in the same maze as younger, healthy mice.
Right, so the young mice could navigate and remember which way to turn in the maze. The older mice that had the pathology more advanced could not.
Duff says this, along with other tests, showed that tau tangles mess up our grid cells, killing off nerves and leading to confusion, as if our Google map isn't loading fast enough. Duff and her team are now looking at the exact type of neuron within the grid clusters that's affected.
Because if you can identify the type of cell that is vulnerable, you can start to develop therapeutics perhaps to prevent that cell from being vulnerable.
Dr. David Knopman, a clinical neurologist at the Mayo Clinic, says there's still a long way to go.
I think it's important to state that mouse models are not human disease, but in the long run, I think that this is actually very important to help us understand the disease.
They agree that early screenings of the entorhinal cortex could catch the emergence of Alzheimer's long before memory starts failing. But Notman says once someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, there's not much they can do.
As of 2017, we don't have any preventive treatments for Alzheimer's disease, and therefore screening for it has no value. From a therapeutic point of view, it has value only for inducing fear.
Back at the Riverstone Memory Center, Morales and her fellow caretakers will stick to available therapies.
I entertain them, I dance for them, I sing for them.
Notman says there will need to be a lot more research like Duff's before new treatments are available. And this will be largely left to another uncertainty: government funding for scientific research. Catherine Sullivan, Columbia Radio News.
The deadly gas explosion in East Harlem 3 years ago represented a worst-case scenario of what can happen when a gas leak isn't fixed. But fixing a gas leak can take a lot of time. That's what residents in a West Harlem building complex have been learning the hard way. They've been without gas since November. Hannah Long-Higgins has the story.
Right at 135th and Broadway, there's a huge market-rate apartment building. With close to 5,000 residents, it's one of the largest apartment complexes in the country, and it's known by its address, 3333 Broadway. Walking into the building feels like walking into a small town, a town that doesn't currently have gas.
It was a leak in E Tower. Last year there was a leak in C Tower. Each tower, even though it's one big building, each tower has their main gas line.
On a Wednesday afternoon, Alicia Barksdale is walking me through the basement of the building, where chunks of missing ceiling expose large pipes. Plumbers walk in and out of a dimly lit room.
Looked like a war zone at one point.
Barksdale is the president of the Tenant Association, and she's lived here a long time, too. In November, after a resident smelled gas and called 911, all gas lines were shut down, and getting the gas turned back on, it's been a long and complicated process. We get on the elevator to head upstairs. There are signs in the elevator with info about a planned visit from a building inspector tomorrow.
As you see, you can't say they never got notice. Plus, it's put under everybody's door. They do send
Because there's no gas, people can't run their stoves or their dryers. Terrence Catano's lived in the building for 25 years, and he's never experienced this primitive version of his own home.
We can't even, dry our clothes when we go wash because you need the gas for the heat.
And more than that, as a father of young kids, he says he spent $1,500 more this month on food and laundry.
It's a headache because we can't cook a decent meal because of the hot pots that they give us, and it's not fair.
Fairness is on Alexander Lieberman's mind, too. He shares a $3,000 three-bedroom apartment with 2 roommates, and he tells me the hot pots aren't enough.
To boil water, it takes ages. So what I do is I use the kettle, and then I put the hot water in the pot, and then I cook pasta. I mean, it works well, but to be honest, electricity charges are much higher now.
The building's management has cut the rents to cover some of the costs, but Lieberman says the difference doesn't cover the added cost of inconvenience. And before the gas can come back on, the building's pipes have to pass multiple inspections by several different agencies, and it's a process that can feel like it's going around and around in circles. Meanwhile, residents like Barksdale have to wait it out.
It's costly, I have my mom that comes, a couple of days a week that I have to feed for her doctor's appointment.
But Barksdale is a glass half full kind of person.
Me, I'm fine. I was like eating cereal. Okay, I can get rid of some of the lose weight. People look at it as different things.
Before the gas can come back on at 3333, the Department of Buildings has to check the risers in each and every apartment. Just one uncooperative tenant can halt the process for everyone else. Barksdale likes to keep it in perspective.
This is a gas leak, and this is, 5,000 lives in jeopardy. Some tenants don't like it, but we're alive.
Alive and safe, but at an extra cost. Hannah Long-Higgins, Columbia Radio News.
3 years ago, a Con Edison gas leak explosion rocked East Harlem, destroying 2 six-story buildings, killing 8 people, and injuring 50 more. Last night, Con Edison and the New York Public Service Commission in Albany came to a settlement. Con Edison will pay $153.3 million to the state to cover the damage and repay former residents and neighbors at the site of the blast. Our reporter Sarah Gibson talked with locals about what the settlement could mean for them.
It's lunchtime, and deli owner Qasem Lourissam is making sandwiches at his shop just 2 blocks from where the explosion took place 3 years ago. His original deli was destroyed, and he's had to pay a lot for this new one. He's one of a number of business owners suing Con Edison for physical and monetary damages. The minute he learns about the news of the settlement, he calls his lawyer.
Everybody's calling me.
How you doing?
You saw the papers, am I right?
Actually, no, it's just a reporter in my store, and she the one delivered the news.
In the hours after the explosion, Lourissam was buried in the rubble, and he says he now has long-term spine and knee damage. Down the block, Odalis Guzman has been following the news. She's a hair salon owner and member of the lawsuit with Lourissam. She recalls the moment of the explosion like it was yesterday. She had just arrived at her hair salon.
I was making coffee, I was sitting at my station, and all of a sudden, the explosion, and I just flew out my chair, and it was horrible. Like, I never thought that I was going to see or live anything like that.
After the blast, Con Edison set up an emergency fund for victims, including business owners. But many say they didn't see a cent, and that's one of the reasons for the lawsuit. Guzman says her emotional recovery has been costly.
It was a long day and a long month because we knew a lot of the people that lived in the buildings and some of the people that passed away.
You knew them? Like, would they come in here as customers?
Yes.
It's like one, you're smiling right now.
Well, George, he had a dog, and he would always come in the mornings and say good morning, and he was a very nice guy.
Everyone I talked to
neighbor.
remembered George and his dog. There are old pictures of them with flowers at the site of the blast. When I asked community board members what this settlement means for victims, like George and their families and local business owners, they said they have no idea. But Con Edison and the New York Public Service Commission are confident the settlement will help them. Philip O'Brien is a spokesman for Con Edison. He says of the original $153 million, $20 million is left. He says the vast majority of that $153 million was already spent on education and upgrading local gas lines over the past 3 years.
The remaining amount of funds, according to the state's decree, will be put into a fund to benefit gas customers, cover the costs to make some more repairs, improve response time, and compensate residents and businesses injured by the explosion.
Guzman says she'll believe it when she sees it. But regardless, some things will never be recovered. Sarah Gibson, Columbia Radio News.
I'm Rebecca Scott.
And I'm Emily Dugdale. For New York neighborhoods prone to flooding, city planners have been developing small, fenced-in gardens with trees and plants that extend 5 feet deep and can absorb gallons of water. They are called bioswales. Though they add greenery to city streets and prevent flooding, not everyone likes them. This afternoon in Flushing, a group of 50 homeowners gathered to protest the city's plans to install bioswales in front of their properties. Taylor Wisner reports.
Rose Klinko and Christy Ling are standing in front of Ling's home in Flushing, Queens, where they are upset by neon green and orange markings on the sidewalk. The markings were made by the city to show where they could drill for soil samples.
We're going to end up losing, literally from here to where the letters are.
That's crazy.
That's crazy, right?
Last year, when Ling found out she might be getting a bioswale in front of her home, she was so upset she reached out to her state senator, Tony Avila. She wants an option to opt out of the rain garden, which should span 20 by 5 feet, as wide as her house. She says the gardens could be dangerous for her family because they cut into the sidewalk space and contain contaminants from runoff.
It's
so
fenced in,
people could possibly fall over.
Right.
I have 2 young kids. I'm worried about them getting in and out of the car.
The city has been installing thousands of bioswales throughout New York City as part of the Green Infrastructure Program. Shina Tanikawa, who is the executive director of New York City Soil and Water Conservation District, says the bioswales are critical.
that increased volume of rainwater coming into the sewer system overwhelms the entire system. The treatment plants can only handle so many million gallons of wastewater. And when that happens, the mixture of sewage from your homes and the rainwater from the streets and roofs get discharged directly into places like Flushing Bay or the East River without any treatment.
Back in Flushing, Rose Klinko is frustrated the city didn't consult with her before testing the soil in front of her home. As for the contaminants that would be trapped in the soil, Tanikawa says she doesn't think they're dangerous.
If the contaminants are bound in the soil, then it's not a danger to the public unless you're digging in there and eating the soil.
Senator Avila says the proposal for an opt-out plan is to the Department of Environmental Protection, and he's waiting for an answer too. Taylor Wisner, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that does it for today's broadcast of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our foreman today was executive producer Melissa Caceres. Our senior producer Susmita Pathak worked with Christian Schwab and Devin Brisky.
Senior editor Camila Kerwin and assistant editor Lindsay Cordica led our copy team.
Director Camila Kadelska coordinated our studio production with Max Hauptman and Catherine Sullivan.
Our web team, Acacia O'Connor and Meg Dalton, got this stream live to the web.
Carrie Donahue, Joe Richmond, Sally Herships, and Ausha Secker advised our staff. I'm Emily Dugdale.
And I'm Rebecca Scott. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. Until next week, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.